It's great to see you guys. I see some people are can bold it out for the third day. That's great. I'm going to talk about the requirement, the responsibility that we have, and I know people in here are kind of people that take this responsibility seriously, that in order to live up to our potential as humans, we have to learn how to be humane. I'm going to talk a little bit about violence, compassion, and the brain. And why would we talk about that? Well, it turns out, of course, we have an unfortunate epidemic of violence worldwide. 1/2 of the world's children are victimized violently every year. That's 1 billion kids are victims of violence every year. The adults in the audience don't get out of this either. 1 in 5 of all developed world's adults are going to be victims of violence in 2018. When I come to focus on the United States, unfortunately, people are never surprised when I espouse the statistics that a violent crime occurs every 27 seconds, a homicide every 37 minutes, a rape every 6.5 minutes. When it comes to violence to self, somebody takes their own life every 14 minutes in the US, and 5 people will die by drug overdose every hour. These are sobering statistics. Unfortunately, I come to you today as the face of these statistics. My wife, Jennifer Hensel, and I lost, at that time, our only child, our beautiful baby girl, Avielle, when she was murdered in her first grade classroom with 19 of her friends and classmates and 6 of her educators on a dark Friday, December 14th, just over 5 years ago. As you can imagine, this changes your life in the most profound way. You feel like your world is spinning out of control, and if you don't just grip in with something to hold on to, you're going to get spun right off. So let me explain what we held on to. I come not just as a victim, as a parent, but also with a unique perspective, and that's the perspective of a scientist. Specifically, I'm a neuroscientist, and I've been in the academic and drug discovery arena for just about 2.5 decades now, and I know firsthand what amazing things we can accomplish when we put our time, our effort, our focus, and most importantly, our finances behind a concerted effort to understand the suffering of the human condition. Think about how far we've come just in our lifetimes with regard to understanding and treating heart disease, obesity, diabetes, and cancer. We know personally in our lives what we can do to take care of these organs. And we understand, of course, that if you go up there in the attic and you peel back the layers, that we have this wondrous organ, the brain, in there that helps to regulate the function of these organs. But people are often really shocked to find out when I tell them brain science is virtually the most unexplored science that we have. We know more about subatomic particle structures. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do what's between our ears here. One of our interns put it really eloquently. She said, considering this is the organ we use to consider, it's really ironic how little we know about it. Things that we don't understand, things that are sort of not under the lamppost, in the darkness, we fear, we mysticize. It's not uncommon for people to think about themselves in a dualistic fashion as a result of this mystical brain activity. We think of ourselves, where am I separate from where the physical is? You know, here's my meat on top of my feet, but where am I? I'm out here somewhere else. But we know that's just not the case. We don't know a lot about the brain, but we do know that it's the house of our memories, our feelings, and our behaviors. So when my wife and I were faced with this infinite tragedy, we played to our strengths as scientists and created the Avielle Foundation with the mission to prevent violence and build compassion through neuroscience research, community engagement, and education. And it turned out that this was a real unmet need. There's virtually no funders available to study violence in a scientific capacity. So let me explain our mission in more detail. On the one side, we're going to fund neuroscience research. We think it's critical to actually study the science of violence. What happens in the brain biochemically, structurally? What are the risk factors in the environment that lead to violence? And what are the protective factors that lead away from violence toward compassion, kindness, and humane behavior? But we recognize that science in a vacuum has no value if you can't give it to the everyday person in a way that's meaningful, that they can grasp onto and approach so that they can take home some tools that in a time of crisis they can use in a meaningful way. So the other side of our mission, the second half, is community engagement and education. But there's unfortunately a number of barriers in our way, and the biggest barrier is the mental barrier. And we really have to approach this one and blow it away before we can move forward. The mental barrier is a giant elephant in the room. It's this huge problem that nobody wants to see or address. You can imagine how well this goes over when you're giving a congressional education briefing and telling them that the problem's a big elephant in the room. But on one side of this aisle, we have the sentiment, essentially, guns don't kill people, people kill people. If you want to stop violence, look no further than the mentally ill. And let's look at that, whether you agree with it or not. I think we can all agree that somebody that's capable of taking their own life, or somebody that's capable of going into a first grade classroom and killing a bunch of kids, isn't behaving normally. That's abnormal. On the other side of this aisle, we have the sort of the response to that first statement, and that's that the people with mental illnesses are more likely to be victims of violence than to be perpetrators. And it's really important that we understand where this comes from. Right now, we label people with mental illnesses. It's not uncommon. It doesn't feel strange to hear somebody say, you are depressed, you are bipolar, you are schizophrenic. But would it be strange to hear you are colon cancer? You are heart disease? These are diseases of the body. The brain is just another organ. And unfortunately, because of these labels, and because of the misunderstanding of the organ, the brain, people are afraid to advocate for their own mental health. They're afraid to get help. They're shamed by it, and there's a lot of discrimination against it. And make no mistake, when we look back at the Sandy Hook murders, this was the problem. The Sandy Hook shooter had clearly documented throughout the community many, many problems that were all made aware to many people, but nothing was done appropriately to intervene, and it led to a horrible tragedy. Perhaps the sentiment that we need to express on that first side of the aisle is that guns don't kill people, people kill people with guns. We just need to finish the sentence. But let's take a look at this mental barrier. Under this umbrella of mental illness, there's a lot of people standing there. And as a whole group, they are certainly more likely to be victims than to be perpetrators. But it would also be irresponsible to ignore the fact that a lot of these diseases are actually characterized based on violent behaviors. Psychopathic individuals are characterized by unempathetic, callous, impulsive, unemotional, violent acts. And many of the other diseases are diagnosed this way as well. We need to go back and remember that the brain is where our memories and feelings and behaviors come from. So if a behavior is abnormal, it has to be the simple organic consequence of abnormal chemistry or structure. It really is that simple. We just don't know what they are yet. We know that they're in there. If we can move away from mental and move towards an understanding that it's a brain illness, it's a matter of chemistry and not character that we need to work from, that we're responsible for taking care of in ourselves and our loved ones, and thinking of it in a medical fashion so that we can prevent, intervene, and cure it, we can move forward. So this brings us to the second barrier, which is a barrier of ways and means, a financial barrier. We've become a country that's incredibly adept at responding to violence. Believe it or not, if you look at all of our federal spending back in 2010 when the last of these statistics are available, over a third of our federal budget was committed to responding to violence, primarily with incarceration. We have the largest incarcerated population in the world. The incarcerated population is larger than a lot of countries full populations. We don't think about how we can prevent violence. We just think about how to react to it. And if you look at investing, we would gain so much more with a small upfront investment to look at how to prevent it with a profound back-end return. We're essentially sitting in a hallway banging our heads against the wall, wondering, why aren't we going anywhere? How aren't we making any progress? We need to look down these halls. The fact is, we have tools at our disposal. We have wondrous tools that we can use to look at the brain. We can not only look at brains, but we can watch them while they're doing something functionally. We can do the pee in the cup science, looking at biochemicals in the saliva, the blood, and the urine. And we have the power of genetics now, and the new science of epigenetics, which is the study of how the environment shapes the expression of our genes. And we can use these tools to look at the differences between groups, violent individuals, traumatized individuals, and say non-traumatized or non-violent individuals. What are the differences? And that's the lamppost that we can start looking under for prevention, interventions, and cures. And we also need hope. Compassion is the transition from empathy, feeling other people's suffering, to the hope that you can do something about it. And our brains are very unique. We've evolved a profound capacity for adaptability. Our brains are plastic. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to adapt and change in response to our environmental experiences. It occurs on a molecular level, way down at the synaptic level. It occurs on a cellular level. Our cells, believe it or not, can grow, replicate, get bigger. And it occurs on a regional basis, so that the parts that you use a lot become reinforced, get more nutrients and oxygen, clear away the waste more effectively, are strengthened in terms of their ability to signal more effectively. And the parts that you don't use, you don't lose, they're just repurposed. There's not a lot of landscape in the brain, so we got to use it effectively. But when we think about prevention, we gain a lot by looking at how we can take care of and build resilient children. Because as a great quote from the ex-slave Frederick Douglass said, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken adults. We need to move out of the rut of responding and think about preventing and intervening. Essentially, our brains are very unique. We've evolved in a very profound way for a capacity to be plastic, to be able to imagine and grow with time. And when it comes to evolution, we don't play by the same rules as all the other animals do in this world. We have Darwin's finches here. The finches in the top left, the ones with the big beaks, survived because in their environment, the carbohydrate reward that let them survive and thrive was deep inside seeds and tough nuts. So if they couldn't be cracked, they died off and went extinct. The birds, the finches in the bottom right, have the long, thin beaks because in their environment, the carbohydrate reward was deep inside flowers. If they couldn't get their beak in there to receive it, they died off. They had to genetically adapt to suit their environment. But humans don't play by the same rules. If we want to crack a nut, we build a nutcracker. We adapt our environment to suit us. Think about how much adaptation was required to go to the moon. We have amazing capacity for imagination. I argue it's this imagination, this sharing of knowledge, one person's idea building on the next person's idea. This capacity to be human requires us to understand our humanity and to be humane. And those of us that can communicate, connect, collaborate, and create are the pinnacle of the evolutionary human role. And in conclusion, we need to connect some dots. We need to find the, whatever the plural of nexus is, the nexi? Between many different sciences, the neurosciences, psychiatry and medicine, social work. We need to connect entrepreneurs, public health officials, philanthropists, educators, criminal justice workers, tech and innovation, emotional intelligence workers, educators. And we don't, not only do they need to be creating individual nexus between them, they need to recognize that they're part of a very elaborate communication web. They all need to work together to share their ideas, their imaginations, and see that they all play a role. We need to move beyond these individual silos and work together to create a constellation. What we need is a brain health constellation that allows us to live up to our humane potential. And I hope you'll help the IVL Foundation to do that, and I appreciate your time.